We're going to review on the Das Daf, and the MS is a little bit less than a Daf because we only did a half an Amud on Monday. So it starts to Yud Chesam at base halfway down. Amr Belaza, Amr Rabbi. Rabbi is Namoira. The Namoira says that Bikurim Hanocha is Ma'akev, Kriya is not Ma'akev, meaning that the Kohanim are allowed to eat it, or at least they don't get Malkus for eating it. Once the Bikurim it's been placed by the Mizbeach, but Kriya ain't Ma'akev is man. It's not like the Mishnah. The Mishnah we said the Kriya is Ma'akev. Here we have the Namoira which says the Kriya is not Ma'akev, which is in line with the shit of the Rabbanon quoted earlier. Now Gemara's kasha is over here. Is that how can Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yisroel say this? How can Namoira Rabbi Lazar in the name of Rabbi Yisroel say this? When Rabbi Lazar said in the name of Rabbi Yisroel, some other place, some other place he said that if you mafish Bitcoin before Sukkot, the din is that before Sukkot there's a chi of kriya. After Sukkot you can't be kair anymore. If you mafish Bitcoin before Sukkot, so there was a chi of kriya. Now it's after Sukkot, there's no eitzu with these Bitcoin. You can't eat these Bitcoin. Yukavul. The Pashtas, the Gemara understands that why can't you eat the Bikurim now that's after Sukkot, because you can't do Kriya anymore. There's a Raya that Kriya is Ma'akev, and you, the same Rabbi she said a moment ago, that Kriya is not Ma'akev, it's a stira. So the Gemara answers, no, it's not a stira because it's two different things. In other words, now, if you can do Kriya and you don't do Kriya, so then it's okay. The principle of kol roy lebila ein bila ma'akaves bebchol she'ein roy lebila bila ma'akaves. We find a similar idea by mixing up the mixing, which is by the menachas, that you need to be able to mix it. It needs to be, but if it's too much volume of flour, etc., in one keli, so then it's no good. On the other hand, if you didn't do mixing, it's okay. It's what's pshat. The Gemara explains, the Rabbi explains over there menachas that it has to at least be royal. It has to be that you're able to mix it. If you don't mix it, so it's okay. But it has to be able to be mixed. But if it's not able to be mixed at all, then it's a problem. So the same thing over here. You have to be able to do kriya. So whenever there's a chi of kriya, you have to be able to do kriya. If you don't do kriya, it's not ma'akev taka. And that's what Rabbi Lazar Marashi says. On the other hand, over here, where it's after Sukkot and you're not able to do kriya anymore, there was a chi of kriya chal on this bikurim. So then, since it's not royally kriya, so then it's ma'akev. That is how a miyash the stereo. Rabbi Lazar Marashi, it comes out that here we have a little tweak. In other words, even though originally we understood that Kriya is not Ma'akev according to Rabbanan, here Rabbi Lazar Marashi is telling you that Kriya is sometimes Ma'akev, meaning to say there has to at the very least be the capability of being able to do Kriya. If there's no longer the capability of being able to do Kriya, then it's a problem. That's the steer between Rabbi Lazar Marashi and Rabbi Lazar Marashi. The Gemara now does a similar thing by saying that there's another version whereby it wasn't Rabbi Lazar Marashi who says this, then Hanoch is Ma'akev, Kriya is not Ma'akev, it was Rabbi Yochanan. And here we have a steer of Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan said somewhere else something which is soiser, and over here it's soiser on two accounts, not just kriya. It's not just a steer that in one place says kriya is ma'akev, and in another place says kriya is not ma'akev. But here we have that in one place he says hanocha is ma'akev, kriya is not ma'akev, and in the second place he says that kriya is ma'akev whenever you need to do kriya. And in a case where there's no kriya, then you don't even need hanocha. As long as misharo pnei abayis, the kohenim can already eat it. So it's a twofold steer, two times steer. One is a steer kriya. Then in one place Rabbi Yochanan says the kriya is not ma'akev, and here he's saying that the kohenim are allowed to eat it only once mishakar aleh. And the other steer is that earlier he says that hanocha is ma'akev, and over here he's saying in a case where there's no kriya shayach, then you don't even need hanocha. You don't even need it to put it by the mizbech. As long as misharo pnei abayis, as long as it's coming to the Beis Hamikdash, so then it's already the kohenim allowed to eat it. So the twofold steers. So the Gemara answers basically that the Rabbi Yochanan himself holds like he answered Ravasi that ruin likrim mishakar alen v'shein ruin likrim misharo pnei abayis. But when Rabbi Yochanan earlier said that hanocha is ma'akev and kriya is not ma'akev, so then he was talking according to the shit of the Rabbanan. So that's the shit of the Rabbanan. And over here, where he answers the halacha l'maisa, that when the kriya is ma'akev, and if it's not shaykh kriya, then hanocha is not ma'akev, and it's just mishrab pnei abayis. That is going according to the shitta of, first of all, the shitta of Reb Shimon, who says that kriya is ma'akev, as we've seen in Daf Yud Zayin. And the second thing, which is that hanocha is not ma'akev, is Reb Yehuda. Yehuda says that hanocha is not ma'akev. Wow, how do we know that? Where do we see that Yehuda holds hanocha is not ma'akev? So the word is like this: that the way we know that hanocha is ma'akev is based on the principle that when the Torah says something twice, it means that not only is that mitzvah to do, but if you don't do it, it messes it up, it ruins it. So too over here, hanocha it says twice. It says twice the hanocha. So that's why the Tanakama, the Chacham hold, the Rabbanon, hold Hanoch is Makkos says twice in the pasuk V'inachta. Rabbi Yehuda holds Hanoch is not Makkos because he said that one of the V'inachtas isn't referring to Hanoch, but rather it's referring to Snufa. We have a brayso which says Rabbi Yehuda says V'inachta doesn't mean Hanoch like simple meaning, but rather means Snufa. How do we know that? Because it says somewhere else that V'inicha and that means Hanoch. So V'inachta must mean Snufa. Okay. Who's the Tanu who says explicitly that the Hanocha over here is the two Hanochas, the two psukim which say V'inachta, V'inichai are both referring to Hanocha and it's Yama Akav. So it's the Rabbanan, but who says it explicitly? So it's a brayso which Taka learns Tnufa from a different pasuk. You don't have V'inichai or V'inachta to tell me Tnufa. Rather, Tnufa is from the word Miyodcha. Les Ben Yaakov holds that the word miyodcha, the yodcha, the hand, which is it's where we learn out tnufa, and it's exer shava from shlam. The shlam it says the word miyodcha, and over there it says that you do tnufa straight away after that. So to over here, when it says miyodcha, it means it's referring to tnufa. And as a side point, the Gemara says that from the exer shava we learn that each one is megal on the other one. By shlam it doesn't say anything about the Klein doing tnufa. By bikurim it's the other way around. It says the Klein does tnufa. It says the Klein takes it miyodcha. It doesn't say anything about the Yisroel. So we learn that tnufa tak applies that both the Klein and the Yisroel do tnufa, and the way it's done is that they both hold it together. The Klein holds it, and the Yisroel holds it. Sorry, and the Klein holds it underneath, and they both do tnufa while holding the basket together. And the way we learn that they both do it is because by shlamim it's mashma that the Yisrael is doing it. By bikurim it's mashma that the Klein takes a miyadcha and the Klein does tnufa. So from the Gzei Shava we also learn not just that miyadcha refers to tnufa by bikurim, but also the way that tnufa is done by both the Yisrael and the Klein. Okay. Next Gemara is that Rabbi Adam Rabbi Yitzchak says this din of Shiur pnei abayis. Bikurim becomes bikurim Shiur pnei abayis. Earlier we spoke about the Klein being able to eat it. According to Rashi over here, it's that it becomes bikurim to the extent for the purpose that the zor who eats them is going to be chayiv nisa. And we say command ki haitana attack. We have a brayso that says that you can have a bikurim which half of it is inside the Beis Hamikdash and half of it is outside. And taka, the part which is outside will be considered chulin, and the part which is inside will be considered hektish. Okay. And finally, now we move on to what we learned today, today's Amud, which is Rav Shesha says, again, what the Rabbanan said earlier, that Bikurim Hanoch is Yamaka, and Kriya is not Maka. And who does it go like? So earlier, I guess you were explaining why Hanocha, how do you know that Hanocha is Maka? Because you have two times V'inicha. Now he's just saying that which Tana does it go like? Besides the Rabbanan earlier, the Gemara wants to suggest that it goes like a Rabbi Yossi in the Bryce. What does Rabbi Yossi says in the Bryce? So the kids, Rabbi Yossi is really talking about something else. Rabbi Yossi is talking about Ma'aser Sheni B'Zman Hazeh. We know that Ma'aser Sheni, you have to be mafresh Ma'aser Sheni B'Zman Hazeh, at least in Eretz Yisrael, the Raisa. The question is, can you eat it in Yerushalayim? In other words, when the Torah says Lifnei Hashem, eat it Lifnei Hashem, does that only refer to Yerushalayim B'Zman Habayis, or does it also refer to Yerushalayim nowadays? So the Gemara, the Brisa, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shmuel says that I might think that you could eat it. The truth is no. We learn from Bechor that no. Bechor is only B'Fnei Habayis. So too, Ma'aser Sheni is only. Gemara says, well, how can you learn it from Bechor with a simple binyan avlet? Bechor, this is the din. It's the same thing applies to Ma'aser Sheni. There's a reason to be mechala between the two. But Bechor needs to be brought to the mizbeach because it needs to have blood be sprinkled and the parts of it be offered up on the mizbeach. You can't say the same thing when you go to Ma'aser Sheni. So Gemara says, well, just a second. Bikurim can prove to me that that's not the case. Bikurim doesn't need to be burnt on the mizbeach or anything like that. Sprinkle the blood, right? It doesn't have any blood to be sprinkled on the mizbeach, and nevertheless, Bikurim doesn't apply nowadays. So Gemara says, just a second, but Bikurim doesn't apply nowadays. But still, because it needs hanocha by the mizbeach. Ma'aser Sheni doesn't need hanocha, so maybe Ma'aser Sheni could be eaten in Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, "Taki, right? Can't learn it from a regular binyan av, just a regular learning one thing from another. Rather, it's a hakash." Pasuk says Bechor in the pasuk right next to where it says Ma'aser Sheni. So just like Bechor can only be done nowadays, so also Ma'aser Sheni can only be done. Sorry, just like Bechor cannot be done nowadays, can only be done B'Zman Habayis. So too Ma'aser Sheni can only be done B'Zman Habayis and not nowadays. That is the end of the brayso. Right, so the brayso basically tries to make a tries to make a binyan av to learn Ma'aser Sheni from Bechor, and it says, and then tries to learn Ma'aser Sheni from Bikurim. But this is the important point that when it says that you can't learn it from Bikurim, it says Ma'ala Bikurim Shkein Tonim Hanocha. Bikurim needs Hanocha. Just a second. What do you mean Bikurim needs Hanocha? Bikurim also needs Kriya. Elamai is a raya, this Tana which went through this whole backwards and forwards and said there's no Kavachim because Bikurim needs Hanocha, holds the Bikurim Taka doesn't need Bikurim. The Bikurim Taka doesn't need Kriya. Kriya is not Ma'akav. and it supports Rav Sheshes, who says that Kriya is not Makkos. So the Gemara straight away, Rav Ashi slugs this up and he says, what do you mean? It still needs Kriya, it just is not Makkos. Right? In other words, he kashes the kasha either way. I don't understand. Either way, you can't understand why the bride says only Mali Bikurim Shekain Tunin Hanach. It should have said Mali Bikurim Shekain Tunim Kriya, because there's a mitzvah to do Kriya, even if it's not Ma'akav, even if the Kleinim don't get Malkus if they eat it earlier, but it still needs Kriya. And therefore, Rav Ashi said the reason why he doesn't say Kriya is for a different reason, not because Kriya is not Ma'akav. Kriya is Taka Ma'akav. Any case where you have Kriya, where there's a Chi of Kriya is Ma'akav. The reason why it doesn't say Kriya is because like Psikra, I mean, say not every single case has Kriya. There's Kriya Hager, and there's other cases where there's no Kriya, like after Sukkot. There's no Kriya, so therefore didn't want to say something which by Bikurim sometimes applies, sometimes doesn't apply. So it talks about Hanacha, which always applies. Okay. That is really the end. In other words, we tried to bring a raya from the Brisa to Rav Sheshes, the Bikurim Kriya is not Ma'akim. He said there's no raya. Now the Gemara goes back to the Gufa Brisa and says, just a second, we learn it out of a Hakash. But why do we learn it out of a Hakash? We could have learned it out of a Binyanam. You told me you can't learn it from Bechor because Bechor is this form and Bikurim has another. Learn it from both Bechor and Bikurim together. Often that's what the Gemara does. When it has a Binyanam and it can't learn from one place and it can't learn from a second place, so then it learns from the combination of two together. In other words, each one has a chumrah, but the chumras are not the same one as the other. So we learn from both combined. So why over here can't we learn Ma'aseh Sheni from a Binyanah from Bechor and Bikurim as a combination? So the Gemara answers that no, both Bechor and Bikurim, the tzad hashava from them is that they both have tzad mizbech. Something needs to be done by the mizbech, and therefore you can't learn to Ma'aseh Sheni, which has no connection to mizbech whatsoever. It just needs to be simply eaten in Yerushalayim. Maybe it does apply nowadays, and therefore the Gemara ultimately had to say that the Brisa had to ultimately say that we don't have a Hakash, where Hakash is not based on Svaras, it just compares the Ma'aseh Sheni to Bechor, and that's the end of the story. Now the Gemara asks a more fundamental question when they get to the Brisa, which is, how did the Brisa Bechlal learn from Bechor? The Brisa, both in the beginning of the Brisa and the end of the Brisa, assume that Bechor for sure cannot be eaten nowadays in Yerushalayim. Why were you so sure about that? And the way we have to tie choice is that true, there's no mizbeach, but what about a situation where the only thing that we're being done about, the only thing we're talking about is whether it can be eaten in Yerushalayim, meaning to say that the Bechor was offered up when the mizbeach was around, and then the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So now the question is, can the Bechor be eaten in Yerushalayim by the Kleinim or not? So why are you so sure that in such a situation Bechor wouldn't be able to be eaten in Yerushalayim, and that you're applying to Ma'aseh Sheni the same din? And a mimonashach. The way the Gemara asks is like this: if kedusha rishayna kitchel l'shayt of a kitchel asilava, that the kedusha which there was in the Beis Hamikdash applies even is nimshach even after the korban. So not only could the Bechor be eaten in Yerushalayim, the Bechor could be offered up. So for sure you can eat it in Yerushalayim. What's the shayla? Never mind. You can even offer it up. For sure it's lifnei Hashem. You can offer it up. For sure you can eat it in Yerushalayim. It's lifnei Hashem. If you're going to tell me that no, there's no kedusha sabayis anymore, so then fine. But then maybe not. Maybe Bechor can be eaten in Yerushalayim. Maybe not. Why are you so sure that Bechor can't be eaten in Yerushalayim now that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed after the dam was already sprinkled and so on? And Ma'aseh Sheni, you're not so sure. Why are you more sure about one and then the other? They're both being done about whether it can be eaten in Yerushalayim or not. And Bechor, you're sure it cannot be eaten. And Ma'aseh Sheni, you're learning from Bechor. You should have the same shayla by Bechor, whether it's considered lifnei Hashem or not. So my answer is, yeah, you're right, basically. But by Bechor, there's this hakash between the boss and the dam. Pasuk says in one pasuk, the pasuk says, so we learn that if the dam can be sprinkled right now, so then the B'sarim Yelach. If the dam couldn't be sprinkled now because there's no Beis Hamikdash anymore, so even if the dam was sprinkled earlier, but you can't eat the basa. So that's taka how we know that the basa of the Bechor can't be eaten. It's not because it's not considered lifnei Hashem. It's because we compare the basa to the dam, and the dam can't be sprinkled because there's no mizbeach. So for sure, so therefore the basa can't be eaten as well. And once we know that the basa of the Bechor can't be eaten in Yerushalayim, we learn from a hekash from the basa to Ma'aseh Sheni. The Ma'aseh Sheni also can't be. That is ultimately how the Gemara says that we learn from the Brisa. Now the Gemara just has one final question. It's just a second. We have a klal in Kachim, wherever we're talking about Kachim, the Kinyan, and the Gemara says in Zvachim that one thing which is learned out of another from a hakash can't then teach to another thing. Right? You have to learn directly from the thing which the pasuk explicitly talks about. But if one thing, if like B is learned out from A, you can't learn C from B. So you have to learn directly from A. But if you can't learn through some, right? You can't learn one thing from a hakash out of something else which is also learned out of that. That's the Gemara's kasha. And over here, the basar is what it said. The dam is what clearly needs a mizbeah. The basar is learned out of a hakash from the dam. So how can you learn from the basar, which is learned out of a hakash to the Ma'aseh Sheni? The Gemara answers by saying, no, Ma'aseh Sheni is chulim. Ma'aseh Sheni is not kachim. And we know, if you look in the Gemara and Tzvachim, that the whole cloud of not learning one thing out of a hakash from something else, which itself was learned out of a hakash, only applies to kachim. But here Ma'aseh Sheni is chulim. That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara the Gemara challenges that and says that can't be because that only works according to one shit in Zvachim, which is that the way we determine whether something is kosher with regards to this din is we look at what we're learning to. So in this case, that's fine. Ma'aser Sheni is cholin, and we're learning to Ma'aser Sheni. But there's another shit over there in Zvachim which says that what determines whether something is considered kosher or not, as to whether, for the purpose of whether it can be learned out of something which was already learned out of a hakash, is not dependent and not based on the thing you're learning to, but it's dependent on the thing that you're learning from. In which case, over here, the thing that you're learning from is the basar of the b'choy, which is kachim. What's the help the Ma'aser Sheni is fully? You're learning from kachim, and therefore you shouldn't be able to learn it out of a hakash. And what's this taka? Yeah, you're right. We're not behemoths. You can't learn it out of a hakash from something which was learned out of a hakash. The reason why over here you can learn it from basar is because basar wasn't learned out of a hakash. Damu basar chadam milsi. The damu basar is considered all one thing. It's all one part of the. It's one animal. It's one thing, and therefore it's not pshat that one is learned out of a hakash from the other. It's just kind of the Torah says the dam has to be sprinkled in the mizbeach, and the basar you can eat, but it goes together. And then it's not a hakash that basar is being learned out of dam, and therefore since it's not a hakash, you can learn from the basar of the chayr to ma'aser sheni. Okay.